I didn't think you'd actually show up, my son-in-law muttered as I stepped into the baby shower, late and dusty. Someone behind him whispered, "Did the maid take the wrong turn?" I smiled. What they didn't know was, I just saved a child's life. So I straightened my back, looked him in the eye, and said, "I may be late, but I still know what matters. If you've ever been dismissed for showing up with your heart full and your hair messy, stay with me till the end, and let me know what city you're listening from. I want to know how far this story travels. My name is Margot Eldridge. I'm 69. I spent 40 years wiping noses, tying shoelaces, and teaching kids to spell, because, with that silly old chant, big elephants can always understand small elephants. I'm a retired preschool teacher, a widow, and apparently not pastel enough for my daughter's new family. The invitation had arrived in an envelope thick as a wedding card, with delicate calligraphy and a golden wax seal. See Amelia and Morrison family baby shower, Sedona Springs Resort, Champaign Courtyard, 1100 a.m. sharp. Pastel attire requested. Pastel, Champaign Courtyard. I had to reread it 3 times before the laughter kicked in. I wiped my hands on my gardening jeans and shook my head. My daughter had officially become someone else. But I was going. I packed my one blush pink blouse, wrinkled from the back of the closet, and some sandals that hadn't seen daylight since Bush was president. I left Prescott before dawn. By 9:30, I was halfway to Sedona, dust trailing behind my old Subaru like a dry ghost. That's when I saw him, a boy, no more than 6, standing at the edge of the road. Shirt drenched in sweat, eyes wide, shoes untied. I pulled over. He didn't speak, just stared at the asphalt like it had betrayed him. "Are you lost, sweetheart?" I asked. He nodded, lower lip trembling. So I handed him water, dialed 911, and we waited on the curb under my umbrella. His little fingers curled around mine as if he knew I'd stay. By the time his mother arrived, I was soaked in sweat, my blouse clinging like a damp napkin, and my sandals now gray with dust. Squeaked with every step. I'd texted Amelia that I'd be late. No reply. No surprise. When I finally reached the resort gates, a valet stared at me like I'd stolen a car. Inside, everything smelled like mimosas and floral spray. Everything gleamed, except me, and as I stepped through the courtyard archway, the chatter dipped. Glasses paused midair. A woman in blue said, "Who invited the help?" Morrison didn't even fake a smile. "Thought you weren't coming," he said, eyes on my dust-covered feet. I forced a smile. I thought someone might need me today. I scanned the room for Amelia. She stood by the cake table, one hand on her belly, the other clenching the knife. She didn't move, didn't wave, didn't even blink. Not once. What would you have done if your child stood still while others mocked you? Comment if you would have left. 2, if you'd have stayed. Either way, I stayed. But something was about to change. The smell of oatmeal and crayons still haunts my memory. Every morning, when Amelia was little, our house smelled like that. I'd wake at 5, toast bread with cheap margarine, spoon oatmeal into plastic bowls with cartoon frogs on them, then brush Amelia's tangled curls while she sleepily mumbled about spelling tests and ballet shoes. Back then, we didn't have pastel parties. We had Wednesday night coupons and Saturday park picnics, when I could afford gas. My husband, Warren, died when Amelia was 6, a heart attack? At the wheel. He never made it to the parent-teacher night he'd promised to attend. I remember sitting on the linoleum floor, Amelia curled in my lap like a kitten, her voice smalls. "Is Daddy going to miss Christmas?" I didn't answer. I just held her tighter and prayed the rent check wouldn't bounce. We didn't talk much about grief. We survived it, like women do. I returned to teaching toddlers that January, half days at first, then full, then late nights cleaning paintbrushes and scrubbing marker from tables, just to keep the classroom bright enough for children to feel safe. Amelia would stay behind after school, quietly finishing homework in the back of the classroom. Sometimes she'd color pages for my students, fold paper hats, pass out juice boxes like a little hostess. She never complained, not once. But even then, even when she was 9 or 10, I'd catch her gazing out the window as the other kids got picked up in sleek cars. And I'd wonder, did she envy them? One time I asked. She shook her head. "I like our car," she said. "It smells like you and peanut butter." Funny how a child's love can blind you to the cracks that are forming. She was my world, and I suppose I was hers. Until she wasn't. That morning I remembered all of it, standing in that courtyard of champagne and silk, covered in dust, smelling of Arizona heat and road grit. I remembered what love used to look like. Messy, sticky,
Unrefined, I wondered.
When did she start preferring satin to sincerity? It started small, a change in tone, a shrug instead of a hug. She began calling me Mum with a certain crispness, like it had edges, like it could cut. By 15, she wanted to be called Amelia Grace? Not just Amelia, always both names, as if shedding everything soft and childlike. She wore perfume I couldn't pronounce, watched shows about attorneys and art dealers in apartments that cost more than our entire street. Her laugh changed. Less full, more curated. I told myself it was normal. Teenage years, growing up, finding identity. But it felt like she was sanding off the parts of herself that smelled like peanut butter and glue sticks. One Sunday, we were folding laundry. The dryer hummed behind us. She held up my favorite blue blouse, worn thin at the elbows, and said, "Do you ever wish you'd done more with your life?" I blinked. The room shifted. Suddenly, the sunlight felt too sharp, the air too still. "I raised you," I said softly. That was everything. She didn't answer, just tossed the blouse into the donate pile. After that, she stopped staying after school, stopped joining park picnics, started spending weekends with the Morrison family, her debate partner's parents. They had a backyard pool, a wine fridge, and linen napkins. By her senior year, she was calling me Margot. When she was angry, "Margot, stop. You don't get it. Margot, I have a future to plan." And maybe she was right. I didn't get it. I didn't understand how fast a child's love can change when it's trying to impress strangers. How quickly, "Mom, watch me," becomes, "You don't have to come." I still packed her snacks every morning, still left notes in her locker, still paid bills in quiet grocery store bathrooms on my lunch breaks just to keep the lights on. But somewhere between spelling bees and scholarship interviews, I'd become invisible. That's the thing no one tells you about motherhood. Sometimes, you disappear long before they leave. And now, decades later, I stood in that resort courtyard, watching Amelia smile at polished strangers, a glass of pink lemonade in one hand, her designer purse in the other. She didn't look my way, not once. The ice in the lemonade glass clinked like a warning bell, soft, measured fake. I stood near the drink station, unsure where to go. No one had come to greet me. No one even tried. The server glanced at my sandals, then the dirt caked on my heels, and offered a tight-lipped smile. "I'm fine, thank you," I said, even though my throat was sandpaper. Pastel balloons bobbed in the breeze. A string of silver letters, Ria Melkama baby Marisawan, no mention of Amelia, no word like a daughter or a mother, to be just Morrison. Always Morrison. I spotted Amelia across the courtyard talking to a group of women in matching blush jumpsuits. Every strand of her hair in place. Diamond studs catching the light, not a smudge of emotion on her face. A woman in lilac leaned toward her, whispered something. They all laughed. I took a step forward, then paused. To the left, Morrison's father, Paul, raised his champagne flute. His voice rang out just enough to carry. "Well, it takes real dedication to show up in construction chic." He chuckled. "Gwis, not everyone got the pastel memo. Lauder, not loud, but sharp enough to slice." My fingers tightened around my purse strap. I glanced down, saw the dust on my blouse, the fray at the hem, the coffee stain I'd missed just below my elbow. Across the lawn, someone muttered, "Maybe she's here to apply for the kitchen staff?" I felt my ears flush, a tray clink behind me. Someone bumped past, a fake apology, another sideways glance. I searched the crowd again, just for Amelia's eyes. Nothing, just her hand gesturing mid-sentence. Just her back, angled slightly away from me. She knew I was here. She had to know. But not a nod. Not even a wave. I stood still, my feet aching, sandals cutting into my heel. Thoughts buzzed behind my eyes. She sees me. She's choosing not to see me. That hurt worse than the joke. Worse than the lilac smirks or the dusty hemline. A server passed with cupcakes on silver trays. Vanilla with rose frosting. Tiny edible pearls. Not one crumb out of place. I used to bake her birthday cakes from box mixes. Funfetti. Extra frosting. Smiley face in NNs. She'd once told me, "They're perfect because they're ugly." If she was 7, she meant it. And now, she couldn't even look at me. "Margot?" His voice came from behind me, smooth as butter scraped over ice. I turned. Morrison adjusted his cuffs, then flashed that politician's smile, empty polished. "We weren't expecting you," he said, eyes gliding over my outfit like a scanner. I texted Amelia. "I was delayed." I replied, voice even. He glanced sideways, shrugged. "Well, better late than tasteful, I suppose." A pause. I didn't flinch. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "Look, I get it, you're Amelia's mother. But today's a celebration. Clean, curated. Not chaotic? His words landed like soft punches. I bit the inside of my cheek. I helped a child on the side of the road, I said. That's why I'm in a blinked. Slow? Unimpressed? Admirable? Truly. But maybe next time clean up before you walk into a 200 per head brunch. He was still smiling. I wasn't. Then Amelia appeared. Finally. A breeze caught her hair, lifting it from her shoulder like a whisper. Morrison? She said, touching his arm. Everything okay? He didn't answer, just looked at her, then at me. She turned. Our eyes met. Her face. Still unreadable. Hi, Mom, she said softly, then added louder, for the crowd to hear. You look earthy today. A laugh escaped someone behind her. I felt my stomach tighten. I texted. I said again. I told you I'd be late. She blinked. Tilted her head, yes. But some things don't translate, I guess. Then she walked away just like that. Morrison followed. Hand on her lower back. I stood frozen, surrounded by clinking glasses, flutes of pink mimosas, lauder like tinsel, hollow and too bright, my feet rooted to the tile, my heart somewhere near my throat. No one came to me. No one said. Well, no one even offered water. I glanced at the dessert table. A tower of macarons. A sign in gold script. Sweet beginnings. Hey, bitter endings felt more accurate. I stepped back, the world blurry at the edges, heat rising through the soles of my sandals. And in that moment, I'd never felt more unnecessary. The baby shower faded into clinks and camera flashes. I drifted toward the back terrace, where the chatter dimmed, where the air smelled more like sagebrush than perfume. That's when Morrison found me again. He held 2 champagne flutes, one for me. I didn't take it. Just a quick thing, he said, fishing into his blazer. He pulled out a manila folder. Thin, precise. Paperwork? He smiled. Nothing dramatic, just standard estate planning. I raised an eyebrow. He handed it over with both hands like a peace offering. I took it. The folder was warm from his body heat. You're still Amelia's emergency contact. He continued, gaze fixed on the horizon. We just thought, for the baby's sake, it might be cleaner to update things. I flipped the first page. Font too small? Too formal? Durable power of attorney, there's reassignment of asset management. I blink. What is this? He laughed lightly. That's just legalese. It protects everyone. Should anything happen, we're streamlining responsibilities. My fingers tightened around the folder. You want me to sign over something? Not sign over, Margot, he said gently. Just sign off. Big difference. I looked at him. His smile didn't reach his eyes. This isn't how families handle things, I said, my voice low. Yes, our family, he replied. That's why we're asking. It's not personal, it's procedural. A breeze stirred my skirt. I heard someone call for group photos behind us. I stared at the line where my name was printed in bold. As Margot Eldridge, followed by empty signature lines. Something in my gut tugged. This mentions an account, I said. An asset review. I don't recall setting anything up with Amelia. He shrugged. A bank account from years ago. Might be linked to your pension or an old trust. Honestly, lawyers dig these up all the time. I kept reading. One clause stood out. Full authorization to consolidate accounts under Morrison Family Holdings. I looked up. He was watching me, still smiling, but something about it chilled my spine. You don't have to decide now, he said. But it would mean a lot to Amelia if this were settled before the baby comes. I nodded slowly. Of course. I'll look it over. Take your time, he said, already walking back. I stood there with the folder. The sun dipping low, casting everything in that golden hour glow people love in photos. But all I felt was gray. I turned to the last page. There was a sticky note in Amelia's handwriting. It said, "Sucks. Thanks for trusting us." I stared at it for a long moment, then folded the folder shut and held it like something radioactive. I left the shower without saying goodbye. No one stopped me, not even Amelia. The drive home felt longer. Dust curled behind the Subaru like ghosts refusing to settle. When I turned the key in my front door, the silence wrapped around me. Warm. Honest. I kicked off my sandals, tossed the manila folder on the counter like it might hiss. The kitchen smelled faintly of lavender and dish soap. The clock above the stove blinked 4:38. I stood there for a while, staring at the folder. Warren's voice echoed in my mind. Always know where your name's attached. It was something he'd said when we opened our first joint checking account. I hadn't thought about that moment in decades. But now, the memory felt urgent. I walked into the back room, what I called the paper cave, old tax returns, report cards, cards from Amelia scrawled in crayon, You're the bestest mommy in the world? I opened the green filing cabinet drawer, too. Then pulled out the folder marked S. Warren 1904-2003's. My hands trembled slightly. There it was. Fuzz, Desert Federal Savings Account, trust transfer pending. I remembered now. Warren had set it up the year before he died. He'd been consulting part-time for a mining firm then. Said something about putting aside something special, just in case. I never followed up. Life swallowed me whole after the funeral. Bills, school, survival. But now Morrison had referenced a bank account from years ago. What if I pulled out the stapled summary? The last update was 2004. Account balance at 83,000, and I stared exhaled. Adjusted for time. It could have grown. I should have grown. I grabbed a pen. Circled the routing number. Scribbled a note to check bank. Monday, I tucked the original folder into a manila envelope. Then slid Morrison's papers in beside it, side by side. 2 versions of control. My name appeared on both, but in only one. Was it mine? I stood at the window watching dusk melt into the yard. The hydrangeas needed pruning. The mailbox leaned sideways. Everything here was imperfect, but it was mine, and somewhere in the space between dusty cabinet files and Morrison's polished folder, a quiet fire lit inside me. It started small, a flicker, then steadied. They wanted my signature. But they'd forgotten. I still had a spine. The Desert Federal branch smelled like lemon cleaner and quiet distrust. I sat in the lobby with the old folder on my lap. Warren's papers, now soft at the edges. My name was on the document, so was his. Joint, clear. A young man in a fitted vest called me in. Her Mrs. Eldridge. Right this way. His desk was too shiny. Too cold. I handed him the file. Tried to keep my voice steady. I'd like to check the status of this account. It was opened in 2003. Under Margot and Warren Eldridge. He clicked. Scrolled. Brows slightly lifted. Then he paused. I'm sorry, he said flatly. That file was recently updated under new legal authorization. I blinked. What authorization? He gave me the kind of smile they teach in trainings. Polite, impenetrable. I'm afraid I can't disclose that. I leaned forward. My name is on the trust. My husband passed in 2004. This was never changed. He nodded mechanically. But it appears the authority now rests under a consolidated structure, Morrison Family Holdings. I felt my chest tighten. So you're saying, I have no access to my own trust? He tapped the screen again. There are new guardianship designations tied to prenatal asset protection. It's common in estate mergers. Estate? Merger? Guardianship. They made it sound like I was a mistake being corrected. I see, I said softly, but I didn't. He slid the folder back toward me, gently. Anything else I can help you with today? No, I said, standing. But thank you for confirming what I feared. The Arizona sun hit hard as I stepped outside. The asphalt shimmered. The folder now felt heavier in my hands. I walked to the car, keys trembling. That's when I heard it. Grandma, I turned. Noah, 17. Tall like his mother, softer eyes, backpack slung sideways, dust on his sneakers. He looked concerned. I thought I saw your car from the student lot. What are you doing here? I forced a smile. Just checking on an old account. Nothing serious. He stepped closer, peered at the manila folder, Morrison Family Holdings. His brow furrowed. I saw something like that on a letter Mom left in the kitchen. Something about transfer approvals. My stomach dropped. Did you read it? He hesitated, then nodded. I'm not supposed to, but it had your name on it, Grandma, and a signature line. He looked at me, real? Worried? I think they're hiding something. The folder crinkled in my hand. Do you have time? I asked. I could use someone who still thinks I matter. He didn't speak, just walked to the passenger door and opened it. That small gesture, a door opened, not closed, meant more than any bank document ever could. The ride home was quiet, but not empty. Noah played a lo-fi playlist through the cracked speakers, soft beats, a gentle saxophone under desert sun. I glanced at him. He didn't push, didn't fill the silence with forced comfort, just sat there. Present, I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone simply sat with me. Without an agenda, at a red light, he cleared his throat. You know Mason. From my robotics team. I shook my head. He does IT support at the bank after school. Desert Federal, real nerd stuff servers, firewall access, back-end queries. He turned to me, half grinning. I could ask if he can check something. Not illegal, just like who logged into your file. I hesitated. Noah, I don't want you in trouble. He shrugged. Trouble already exists. It's just quiet. That sentence hit deeper than he knew. He pulled out his phone, tapped quickly, then slid it into his hoodie pocket. He's in until 6, said he can check after. Wants the account ID. I opened the manila folder, carefully tore out a sticky note with the routing and trust number. Noah took it gently, like it was fragile. "I'll be discreet," he said. "You didn't raise a fool?" I looked at him then. Really looked. He was 17, but something in his voice felt older. Older than Amelia's laugh at the baby shower. Older than Morrison's suits. Older than their cruelty. When we got home, I made tea. He sat at the table. Backpack tossed to the side, shoes kicked off. Like he belonged. Like we belonged. I poured chamomile into my grandmother's chipped cups. The kitchen smelled like honey and old stories.
"You okay, Grandma?" he asked.
I smiled faintly. "Ask me again in 3 days." He grinned. Then his phone buzzed. One look at the screen, his face changed. Got something. He slid the phone toward me. Mason's message filled the screen. Has access logged from Scottsdale IP. Logged user Morrison Legal. Downloaded asset summary and full beneficiary override form June 3rd. I stared. June 3rd. 2 days before the baby shower invitations were printed. Weeks before Morrison ever, politely, offered me the folder. So they had accessed the file. Before ever telling me it existed, I exhaled slow, controlled. Noah watched me carefully. I folded the phone shut, then reached over and touched his hand. "Thank you, look down. You matter, Grandma." Even if they forgot, I didn't. Something cracked inside me, not in pain this time, but in relief. Not everything was gone. Not everyone had turned. And maybe that meant I wasn't powerless after all. The invitation came by courier. Heavy cardstock. Gold foil. Smelled like powder and price. Hasik, Amelia and Morrison cordially invite you to the naming ceremony. Hunters for baby Morrison as Scottsdale Country Estates. Formal attire ceremony begins at 200 p.m. sharp. Not our daughter. Not even Amelia's baby. Just another line item under the Morrison brand. I almost threw it away. But something inside me said not yet. I wore navy. Simple pressed. No pastels, no pearls. The estate gates opened like the jaws of a mansion that never wanted me. Trimmed hedges, marble fountains. The air smelled like lilac and bleach. Guests milled under white canopies. Champagne towers. Linen napkins folded into origami. Amelia stood center, glowing in cream silk. Morrison beside her in a tailored navy suit, matching me by accident. He frowned when he saw it. "Margot," he said, pulling me aside. "Did you bring the envelope?" I stared at him. My answer is no. His smile didn't break, just thinned. "We'll talk after." But he knew. He knew the moment was gone. I moved toward the ceremony chairs. Rows of white cushions, guests taking selfies, servers whispering, still or sparkling. I took a seat in the back, and then the microphone crackled. Morrison stepped up, cleared his throat. "We're honored to welcome you all today, not just to name our child, but to celebrate legacy." He paused. "Some legacies," he continued, "are built through generations of intention, vision. Planning others, well, are less formal." A few laughs. I sat still. He smiled toward Amelia, then back to the crowd. "As we prepare to bring this child into the world, we're proud to simplify what came before, to streamline our family's future cleanly, responsibly." More nods, more polite laughter. Then he looked at me. "Not everyone in our family understands this, but we've chosen what's best for our child." Eyes turned. I felt them land on my shoulders like wet cloth. He raised his glass. "To the future, without the confusion of the past." And that's when it happened. One woman turned to her husband and whispered, not quietly, "Did the grandmother sign over the assets yet?" He laughed. "It's the least she could do." Raising Amelia on teacher salary, my fingers dug into the cushion. I stood. I didn't know why. But I stood as the air shifted. Amelia looked at me. Not pleading, not angry, just embarrassed. She stepped toward the mic. "We're grateful to everyone here," she said. "And to those who understand boundaries." Boundaries. I felt my body freeze. Someone coughed. Another adjusted their tie. Morrison sipped champagne cool as steel. I turned to leave, heel grinding into gravel. And then a voice, from near the entrance, clear, sharp, as this where I thanked the woman who saved my son's life. Every head turned. She walked in like she owned the room. Tall, blonde, navy sheath dress, red bottom heels clicking on marble. At her side, a little boy. 6 wide eyes, sticky fingers. My throat caught. It was him, the boy I'd pulled off the curb, the boy I'd given water to under the Arizona sun. Amelia blinked. Morrison shifted. The room hushed. The woman reached the center. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, voice calm, deliberate. But I recognized that woman from the back. She pointed to me. not with pity, with purpose. She stayed with my son when no one else would, on a 100-degree highway. While others drove by, she gave him water, shade, and waited until I arrived. Sobbing, shaking, she turned to the crowd. I'm Savannah Blair, spokesperson for the Arizona governor's office. A collective inhale. And that woman, she turned fully to me. Margot Eldridge is the reason my son is here today. She walked over, took my hand warm.
Steady.
Public. I don't care about dress codes, or wealth, or inheritance structures, she said loudly. This, she squeezed my hand, is what legacy looks like. Applause began, uneasy, then growing. The crowd split. Amelia looked pale, Morrison frozen. Savannah bent down, whispered to her son. He stepped forward, held out a tiny card, on it a crayon drawing me holding an umbrella over him. A sun, a water bottle. I bit my lip, knelt. Thank you, he said, then hugged me, tighter than Amelia had hugged me in years. Savannah smiled. You saved my everything, and I will never forget it. She turned to the crowd. I wasn't invited, but maybe I should have been. Then she walked toward the exit, but not before kissing my cheek.
I stood slowly.
The crowd stared, not at my shoes, not at my blouse.
At me?
For once they saw me. Amelia stepped forward, eyes glassy, voice small. I waited. She reached out, then stopped. Her hand hovered in air. I didn't know. I did, I said, then walked past her, the little boy still clutching my crayon card. My back was straight, my chin lifted. Morrison didn't speak. He couldn't. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like someone worth standing for. What would you have done if your daughter let a stranger speak louder than her love? Comment 1, if you'd walk away. Comment 2, if you'd forgive even if they never asked. And tell me, where are you listening from? We spread the documents across my kitchen table. Noah pulled out his laptop. I brought tea and a notepad. Sunlight slanted through the blinds. The air smelled like lemon and dust. Start here, I said, tapping the folder Morrison had given me. Compare this signature block with what's on file from the original trust. He scanned. Brows furrowed. I'm not a lawyer, Grandma, he mumbled. But something's off. I sat beside him. The old Desert Federal Trust from 2003 lay open to the second page. See this line, he pointed. Beneficiary override requires notarized signature from all listed parties. I nodded. He flipped back to Morrison's folder. Now look at this page. They've got your name, but no notary stamp. Just a digital timestamp from Morrison Legal. Is that legal? I asked. He shook his head. Mazin says banks flag this all the time. Digital only counts if the origin is verified and countersigned. Which this isn't? I exhaled slowly. Which means if you never signed this in front of a notary, it's not binding, not clean, might even be void. I pressed my palms into the table. It was cool, solid. For the first time, so was I. Noah pulled up the state's public legal record search. If Morrison filed anything under the family holdings, it might show up here. He typed clipped. Waited. Got something? He said, voice low. Serious? Document type probate asset realignment Alaska filed by Morrison Legal Asset de June fix of subject T. Eldridge Trust? Transfer to Morrison Family Holdings pre-probate, I asked. It's a trick, he said, used when someone's still alive, but they file early to streamline inheritance. I stared at the screen. They filed like I'm already dead. The words hung in the air, heavy. Noah looked at me, eyes fierce. They didn't just want your name off a piece of paper, Grandma. They wanted your whole existence cleaned out. Silence. Then a bird thudded against the window, fluttered off. I flinched. I stood, paced. They filed before they gave me the documents, I said, meaning they never intended to ask. Just to smooth it after? He nodded. And they didn't expect you to read closely, didn't expect me. He smiled, soft but sure. I touched his hand. Let's print this, everything. If I have to take it to the state myself, I will. He opened the drawer, loaded paper into the printer, hit print, pages spat out in rhythm. On the last page, we both froze. It wasn't just the trust. There was another line. A proposed beneficiary Amelia Graves, sole authority postnatal, alternate guardian Paul Morrison pending condende. My jaw clenched. They weren't just cutting me out. They were lining up who would replace me. As if I'd never existed. I called Amelia the next morning. Her voice came on sharp, polished. Hi, Mom. Is everything okay? Are you free for coffee? I asked. A pause. Click of a keyboard, shuffling papers. Sure, she said too quickly. There's a new cafe on Main. 11 o'clock. as she arrived 5 minutes late, hair tied in a silk scarf, phone still in her hand as she sat. "I can only stay 30 minutes, she said, scanning the menu. "Board meeting at noon." I nodded, didn't smile. When the server left, I slid a single page across the table. No commentary, just the printout. She glanced, then froze. Her pupils narrowed. The corner of her mouth twitched. Where did you get this?" "Public record," I replied. Her fingers curled around her coffee cup. White knuckles. "Mom, it's not what it looks like." "No," I said quietly, "because it looks like my husband's trust was reassigned to your husband's family, and I was listed as pre-probate." She looked down, stirred her coffee, didn't sip it. "I didn't want it to be this way," she said finally. "But you allowed it?" A silence fell, the kind only mothers and daughters can have. Heavy personal, built from 1,000 unsaid things. "I've given everything to you," I said, quietly, without asking for credit or control. Amelia's jaw clenched. "I never asked you to." "No," I whispered. "You just learned to expect it." Her eyes flashed. "I'm building a family now. It's not personal. It's planning, then plan this," I said softly. "I'm done being erased." She said nothing. Just sat, staring at her untouched laddie, the foam collapsing slowly. I stood. "Don't worry," I added. "I won't make a scene, but I won't stay silent either." I left her sitting there, in a cafe she chose, with a lie she let grow. Back home, I opened my desk drawer, pulled out Warren's old business card holder. Tucked inside a number I hadn't dialed in decades. Elliot Crane S. Estate litigation, Flagstaff. I stared at it. He'd helped Warren draw up the trust, helped us sign in front of a real notary. He was gruff, but honest. I picked up the phone, dialed, waited. A voice came on. "Crane and Bell. How can I help you?" I cleared my throat. "Yes, my name is Margot Eldridge. I'd like to request a review of a trust violation." The woman paused. "Is this time sensitive?" I looked out the window. The garden hadn't been watered, but the sky promised rain. "Yes," I said. "It's long overdue." She transferred me. The line clicked, and just like that, I was no longer waiting for justice. I was moving toward it. The rain came just after midnight. Soft at first, then steady. I couldn't sleep. I made tea, chamomile with a drop of honey. The kitchen light buzzed above me. Outside, the desert dirt turned to mud. The wind moved the mailbox flag. It squeaked back and forth like an old lullaby. I wrapped myself in Warren's old sweater, the navy one, frayed at the cuffs, warm in the sleeves. I opened the hall closet, reached for the wooden box, not labeled, not locked. Inside, letters, photos, receipts from a life built on peanut butter, field trips, and secondhand shoes. At the bottom, a faded envelope. "SM. In case you ever feel alone," his handwriting. Firm. Slanted right. My throat tightened. I hadn't read it in years, maybe never. I opened it, unfolded carefully. It smelled faintly of old cologne and dust. Chort, if you're reading this, you're probably doubting yourself. That's your tell, when you give everything and still ask, was it enough? Tor, it was. You were. You var. Tor, if Amelia grows up and forgets, it won't be your fault. It'll just mean the world got louder than your love. Tor, and if anyone tries to take what we built, to remind them who held the bricks. Love you always, you. The tears came before I could stop them. Holland. Years old. I folded the letter, held it against my chest, felt his voice thrum against my heartbeat. I sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from my tea, the window catching flashes of desert lightning. Noah had gone home hours ago, but he'd texted before bed. "You've got this, Grandma." I'd brushed it off with a heart emoji. Now I let it land. I ran my fingers over the letter again. "Read the last line out loud." Slowly. "Remind them who held the bricks." I stood, walked to the drawer, pulled out a yellow legal pad, wrote 4 words at the tarps. My legacy. I had underlined it twice. By sunrise, I had a list. 3 phone numbers, 2 questions, 1 name circled at the top of Elliot Crane. I didn't wake Noah. Didn't text him either. This party was mine. I called Desert Federal first, asked for an appointment with a senior manager. "I'd like to review the authorization trail for trust account 409112E, I said, my voice clear. No tremble. The woman paused. "Is this regarding the Morrison Holdings realignment?" "It's regarding a fraud complaint," I said. "I'll bring documentation." They booked me for Tuesday, 10:30, private conference room. No representatives from Morrison present. Next, I called Elliot Crane's office again. He remembered me. "Warren Eldridge?" "Yes, I did his filings back in Utter 3. "Sharp man." "You sharper? I've had to be," I said. He chuckled. We can meet Friday. Bring copies of everything. Especially anything they had you sign. I hung up, then reached for the fireproof lockbox under the guest bed. Inside birth certificates, marriage license, Warren's death certificate, and my original will, dated 2012. One beneficiary, the C. Amelia Greaves. Second, no contingencies, no clauses, just blind love. I pulled a pen from the drawer, circled her name, then drew a line through it. Not out of spite, out of clarity. I began drafting a new version. As beneficiaries authors I know James Graves Primaries, Margot Eldridge Foundation, Education Support, Early Child. Hey, I created the name on the spot. No assets yet, but I'd build it. I included a note. SEC to be established upon settlement of Eldridge Trust reclamation. As SEC the rest flowed easily. No cars, no jewelry, just accounts. Controlled dignity. I slid the new draft into a blue folder. Labeled Personal Legacy Active. Then, I opened my phone's voice recorder. I spoke slowly. This is Margot Eldridge. Today is August 18. This is a record of my intent. I read through every page, line by line, then hit save. Last step, I placed Morrison's unsigned document on the table, next to my folder, and wrote one word across the cover in red ink. The house was still, but I felt though awake. Not young, not angry, just sure. I capped the pen, folded the letter from Warren into the blue folder, tucked it behind the new will. Then with a breath, I signed it. Just the first page. But it was enough. Monday morning, I wore gray slacks and Warren's old watch. Simple, familiar. I arrived at Desert Federal 10 minutes early. Briefcase in hand. Hair pinned back. The receptionist smiled. Tate, scripted. Mrs. Eldridge. Conference room B. The room smelled like printer toner and stale carpet. A pitcher of water waited on the sideboard. Too cold. Too staged. A man entered. Early 40s. Pressed collar. Corporate badge. Vice President, Client Integrity Division. He extended a hand. Jason Delaney. Thank you for coming. I didn't shake it. I'll be recording this meeting, I said, placing my phone on the table. Per Arizona's one-party consent laws, I don't need your approval, but I am offering the courtesy of telling you. His smile flickered. Of course. I slid the blue folder across the table. My name is Margot Eldridge. This trust was established in 2003 by my late husband, Warren. I never authorized its transfer to Morrison Family Holdings. These are documents confirming that. He skimmed the pages, eyes darting, posture shifting, and this, I said, pulling out a printed email, is confirmation that Morrison Legal filed a pre-probate claim, listing me as incapacitated, without medical record, without consent, he exhaled. Long measured. This is serious. I nodded. I've filed an internal complaint with your governance team, and a legal injunction is being submitted this week through Crane and Bell. Jason straightened his tie. We'll freeze the trust activity immediately. No further withdrawals, no fund movement. Pending legal review, thank you, I said. I stood, shook his hand this time. His palm was cold. That afternoon, my lawyer sent the formal cease and desist. I watched the facts go through from his office. Page by page, line by line. It felt like exhaling after a year underwater. Included were a reinstatement of sole authority under Margot Eldridge, termination of any alternate guardianship claims, undemand for all prior withdrawal records, prohibition of Amelia or Paul Morrison acting in fiduciary roles. The letter was cold, professional, tighter than any slap. It ended with a line I hadn't written but approved with a smile to our client is prepared to reclaim what is rightfully hers, quietly, legally, and without delay. Sai returned home, made chamomile tea, sat by the window as clouds rolled in over the hills. I didn't feel victorious. Not yet, but I felt clean. My phone buzzed just after 4, a text from Noah, as Morrison's pacing in the kitchen. Something arrived FedEx. He looks scared. I stared at the screen, let it sit, then replied, let him pace? If your name was stolen from something you built, would you fight quietly? Or blow it wide open? Comment? For quiet revenge. Comment 2 for full exposure. And tell me, what city are you listening from? She didn't knock. Just stood on the porch, like she used to when she forgot her keys in high school. I opened the door slowly. No apron, no smile, Amelia said. I nodded, stepped aside, didn't say welcome. She stepped in, still in heels, still in cream, but something in her eyes looked less polished. I figured I should come, she said, glancing around. Face to face, I waited. She sat at the edge of the sofa, back straight, hands folded too neatly. I heard something came from a lawyer, she began. Eyes not quite meeting mine. I don't know the details. Morrison's been on the phone with someone all day. He won't talk to me about it. I said nothing. poured tea instead. The ceramic cup clinked slightly as I set it down before her. She looked at it like a foreign object, then down at her lap. I know you're angry. I'm not angry, I said. Anger is hot. This is colder, she swallowed. The silence between us thick as Arizona dust after rain. I didn't want it to go that far, she said. I thought we were protecting the baby's future. Streamlining things? I stared at her. The curls at her temple were damp with sweat. Or shame. Is that what they told you? I asked. She hesitated. No, that's what I told myself. I took a sip. Let the heat fill my chest. You knew about the documents? About the pre-probate filings. Her eyes fluttered. No, I didn't know it was that. If Morrison said it was temporary, just paperwork. Paperwork designed to erase me. I said the words didn't rise. They dropped. She winced. I thought you didn't care about the money. You always said legacies in love, not numbers. I meant that, until you turned my love into a loophole. She finally looked at me. I didn't know how to stop him. He's persuasive. He moves fast. I leaned forward. You didn't need to stop him. You needed to stand beside me. She flinched. Outside, a bird landed on the porch rail. Blue still? Listening. I miss you, Mom. I didn't answer. Not yet. She reached for her tea, but her hands shook. She set the cup back down. I want to fix this? She whispered. I nodded once. You can start by listening, then watching, then asking me what I want, and not deciding for me. A tears welled, but didn't fall. She stood. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I rose too, walked her to the door. She paused at the threshold. Look back. Will you let me try? I looked at the floor, at the grooves in the old wooden frame, at the slippers Warren used to trip over. Then I looked at her. Trying isn't asking me to forget, it's proving you remember. She nodded. Then left. No hug, no promises. Just the first, quiet turn. The ballroom glowed with amber chandeliers and white roses. Morrison stood at the podium, one hand resting on a crystal award. Behind him, a banner stretched wall to wall. As Morrison Legacy Gala building the future, honoring the past, I stepped through the side entrance. Quiet shoes, steady heart. No trail behind me. Pressed shirt, phone camera ready. A hostess looked up, startled. May I help? I'm on the list, I said. She hesitated, checked the tablet. Eyes widened slightly. Of course. Row 3, just behind the donors. The orchestra played something soft, too polished to feel real. I sat in silence. Watched Morrison raise his glass. What, and with the generous contributions tonight, will complete the children's wing by December? He announced. Applause? He smiled. That press-ready smile. Like nothing had happened. But the envelope in my purse said otherwise. He continued. As many of you know, legacy isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to pass the baton. He looked down at Amelia. She smiled. A little too late. And that's why tonight, I want to honor those who helped shape our family's values. He gestured toward a slideshow, photo after photo of Amelia and him, holding champagne, cutting ribbons, shaking hands with politicians. My face never appeared, not once. No birthday cakes, no first-grade art fairs, no peanut butter smiles, just white walls and polished names. I stood. Morrison paused. Eyes narrowed. A whisper rippled through the audience. I stepped into the aisle, walked toward the stage. Amelia turned. Her hand went to her chest. Morrison leaned into the mic. Margot, if I may, this isn't. I won't take long, I said. Firm. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. A few phones lifted. I reached the edge of the stage. He didn't move. I looked past him. Toward the guests, donors, reporters. Then back at the mic. May I speak? I asked. A moment of silence. Then a single voice from the back. Let her? I stepped up. Placed my envelope on the podium. My hands didn't shake. I looked at Morrison, then at Amelia, then down at the letter. It was time. I opened the envelope, pulled out one page, held it up. This, I said into the microphone, is a certified letter from the law offices of Crane and Bell. A murmur. I continued. It confirms that I, Margot Eldridge, remain the sole legal authority over the Eldridge Family Trust, established in 2003. Morrison stepped forward. Margot? This isn't the... I raised a hand. Didn't look at him. It also confirms that the attempted transfer to Morrison Family Holdings was filed fraudulently, without notary, without consent, and in direct violation of the original deed. Gasps. A few flashes of cameras. Amelia sat frozen. Hands clasped, no watched from the third row, eyes-wide, phone steady. I laid the letter flat on the podium, let it speak in silence. Then I looked up. Over the past months, actions were taken to remove me quietly, to reposition my name from founder To forgotten? I took a breath. But I didn't vanish, I didn't sign, and I did not consent to being erased. The lights above me felt warm, but I was cold inside. Still, sharp. This trust was built not just from money, but from scraped knees, teacher salaries, and years of grocery line budgeting. Some in the audience nodded, others looked down. Uncomfortable. Tonight, I reclaim my name. I reached back into the envelope, pulled out a second document. This is a formal notice, I said, effective immediately. Morrison Family Holdings is no longer affiliated with the Eldridge Trust in any financial or advisory capacity. Morrison stepped toward the mic. I held his gaze. Please sit down, I said, and he did. Just like that, I turned to Amelia. I warned no one. Not because I'm cruel, but because power doesn't shout. It acts. Her eyes welled, lips pressed tight. I looked back to the guests. I'm not here to ruin a night, but to correct a narrative, one built without the woman who built the foundation. The room was silent. Even the violinist had stopped mid-note. I let that silence settle, let it land. Then, I folded the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and said only, "Now I believe dessert is being served." I stepped off the stage. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was soft, earned, respectful. A few stood, some nodded. Others just watched. Morrison sat still, flushed, jaw tight. His hand gripped the edge of the table. But he didn't speak. I passed Amelia on the way down. She didn't reach out, but her eyes followed me. Wide. No met me at the door. No words, just a look, proud, protective. We exited into the cool night. The sky over Scottsdale was cloudless. Sharp stars, warm breeze. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until the valet asked if I needed my keys. Then, a voice behind me. Mum, wait. It was shaky, too young for a woman her age. I turned. Amelia ran in heels, not gracefully, just honestly. Mom, please? I stood still. She reached me, face flushed, lip trembling. I didn't know it would feel like that, she said. Watching you speak? Seeing how small we made you? I said nothing. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I thought I was protecting my child's future, but I was just repeating a pattern, making power look like protection. She looked up at me, really looked. I'm sorry. 2 words, simple, sincere. I exhaled. You don't owe me a performance, Amelia. Not out here. Not anymore. She blinked, shook her head. It's not performance, it's regret. And I don't know how to undo what we did. I looked at her. The child, the woman, both lived in that same face. Somewhere. You don't undo it, I said gently. You outgrow it. She reached out, touched my wrist, not grabbing, just contact. Can I come by this week? She asked. To help with the garden, or just sit? I nodded once. Bring real shoes, she laughed. Choked and soft, then backed away, eyes still on me, until she slipped back inside. Noah handed me the keys, he whispered. I didn't answer, just turned toward the car and drove home. Calm, certain, unshaken. The morning after the gala, I opened every window in the house. Let the breeze roll through. It smelled like rain and cut grass, clean, honest. I brewed coffee, the good kind, beans Noah gave me for Christmas. As the kettle hissed, I pulled open the old cedar chest. Inside scrapbooks, theater tickets, a hand-drawn Mother's Day card from 1997. I placed a yellow legal pad beside me, wrote 2 words at the top, Dear Future, then paused. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was full. A knock on the door, not urgent. I opened it to find a young woman in heels and a news badge. Mrs. Eldridge, I'm with Channel 7. We'd love to hear your side. No thank you, I said. Kind but firm. She hesitated. We heard the trust was... I'm not interested in making noise. I've done what I came to do. I closed the door. Gently. No need to slam. That afternoon, I stood in the shed behind the house. It smelled of pine, rust, and old soil. Warren's tools still hung neatly, labels written in Sharpie. I ran my hand along the shelf, found the plaque we never installed. Foth Warren Eldridge, teacher, father, builder of things that last. I carried it inside. Dusted it, set it by the window. It caught the light like a whisper. Noah arrived at 4 backpack, worn Vans, eyes brighter than they'd been all summer. He dropped into the chair by the table. I saw the news, he said. They're calling you the quiet storm? I raised an eyebrow. He grinned. You hate it, don't you? Deeply? He laughed, then pulled out a notepad. So, you ready to build something? I tilted my head. He slid the page toward me. At the top, Farce Warren and Margot fund early literacy, single mothers, first teachers' ears below that. Grant tiers, logo ideas, domain name options. I blinked. You wrote all this? After school. Between math and boredom, I read every line, then looked up. You're not doing this to fix anything, are you? He shook his head. I'm doing this so the world knows where I came from. I smiled, traced my finger along the words, then nodded.
Let's build it slow, I said.
No fireworks, no marble lobbies, just results, just truth. He leaned back, folded his arms, grinned. That's so you. And for once, that felt exactly right. The front gate hadn't changed. Still squeaked on the right hinge. Still painted Robin's egg blue, faded from 100 Arizona suns. Noah held it open for me. The preschool sat at the end of a gravel loop, low beige walls. A mural of animals across one side, still there, though the elephant had chipped ears now. I hadn't stepped inside in nearly 20 years. The scent hit me first. Crayons. Glue? That faint trace of apple juice and hand sanitizer. The new principal, Miss Cardenas, greeted us at the front desk. Late 30s sharp, blazer kind eyes. I can't believe you're the Mrs. Eldridge, she said. Was still use your reading corner model, I smiled. Tried not to tear up. She led us past the main hallway. Kids giggled behind colorful doors. Tiny shoes lined up outside like sleepy turtles. I heard you were looking to sponsor a literacy pilot, she said. Noah jumped in. We want to build early confidence. Start with 3-year-olds. Books they keep, not borrow, she nodded. Eyes lit up. Ownership matters at that age. Even one book can change how a kid sees themselves. We stepped into room 3, my old classroom. The paint was new, but the light through the window was the same golden. Dusty. Kind. At the back, a young teacher sat on the carpet with 5 toddlers. She held up a book. The Snowy Day. I stopped breathing for a second. I'd read that same book. Same spot. Same page fold at the corner. Miss Cardenas noticed. Want to say hello? I shook my head. No. Let her have her moment. This one's hers now. But I watched. And remembered. The songs the finger paints. The 1,000 questions before snack time. This was where I learned to hold attention. To soften anger. To earn trust from tiny humans who hadn't yet learned how to lie. Noah placed a hand on my shoulder. You okay? I nodded. Then whispered. This is where I learned how to speak, so people would feel seen. He smiled. We walked back down the hall. Miss Cardenas paused at the door. Would you consider letting us name the new reading space after you? I hesitated. Then shook my head. Name it after the children? They're the ones who'll change the world. She grinned. Very you. Noah laughed. She hates marble plaques. I winked at him. Unless they're in gardens. We stepped back into the sunlight. The gravel crunched beneath our feet. I looked back once. At the blue gate. At the mural. At the place that shaped me more than any estate ever did. And I smiled. Not because it was over, but because it was beginning again. I made tea at 4:30. Not because I needed it, but because the house felt too quiet not to. The kitchen smelled like chamomile and old lemon wood. I sat by the window, the one facing Warren's old hydrangeas, still stubborn, still blooming crooked. The sun dipped just low enough to cast gold across the table. I opened a fresh page in my notebook. The paper was thick, satisfying to touch. At the top I wrote Yves, if someone ever asks who I was. Then paused. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because, for the first time, I didn't need to prove anything. Still, I wrote I was a mother. Troy was a teacher. Troy was the kind of woman who saved birthday cards in shoebox's door and used the good china on Tuesdays, just because Troy loved one man once. Troy enough to raise a daughter through grief, Troy and build a life from grocery lists and bedtime books.
Troy wasn't wealthy, sure, until I was.
Troy, and even then, I preferred thrift store coats and real eye contact. Troy, they tried to erase me. Troy quietly, Troy behind smiles and paperwork. Troy, but I remembered who held the bricks. Troy, my justice wasn't loud. Troy, but it arrived. Troy, as steady as tea at sunset, I stopped. Let the pen rest. Let the words breathe. Outside, a bird landed on the porch rail, same one maybe, or just familiar. I watched it tilt its head, watch back, then flutter away without rush. Some things leave without drama, and that's okay. I reached for the envelope, slipped the note inside, labeled it with just one word, S. Keep. Then tucked it behind the blue folder on the 3rd shelf, between Warren's toolbook and the deed to this house. A place not grand, but solid. And mine. The knock came soft, rhythmic, like someone remembering not to intrude. I wiped my hands on a tea towel, opened the door. Amelia stood there, no blazer, just jeans and a cotton blouse, a peach cobbler in her hands. Behind her, Noah, carrying board games and a 6-pack of cream soda. Hi, Mom, she said. I nodded. Come in. The house smelled like cinnamon and lemon. The cobbler joined a pot of chili on the stove. No one talked about trusts or lawyers. Or who signed what? We talked about Noah's new guitar. Amelia's failed attempt at sardo. The neighbor's cat who'd started napping on my porch swing. The kind of talking that didn't chase silence, just sat beside it. After dinner, Noah and I played dominoes. Amelia washed dishes, humming something soft. At one point, I caught her watching me. Not with guilt. Just watching. I let her see what didn't need defense. The sun dipped lower. Golden hours stretched across the living room. Lit up the photo wall. One of Warren, one of Amelia at 5, spaghetti on her cheeks. One of me holding Noah as a newborn, half asleep, fully in love. Amelia joined me by the window. "Do you ever wish," she began, then stopped herself. I looked at her. "Sometimes," I said, "but not tonight." She nodded. Quiet understanding in her shoulders. Noah popped open a cream soda. It fizzed over, made him laugh. I handed him a napkin. Warren would have shaken his head. Amelia sat beside me. No more words. Just the sound of evening. A squeaky porch swing, dishes drying on the rack, dominoes clicking like distant applause. And it was enough. Not perfect, but chosen, held. Like the bricks, there's something quiet about dignity. It doesn't arrive with applause. It doesn't demand headlines. But it stands. And when the wind shifts, when the people you love begin to forget where they came from, dignity is what holds you upright. For a long time, I let myself disappear. Not all at once, but slowly. A dinner skipped, a decision made without asking, a birthday where I brought the cake and still wasn't in the photo. I told myself it was love, that being invisible was part of motherhood. That silence kept peace. But silence also buries people. And I decided I didn't want to be buried while still breathing. When they filed that paper, declaring me as pre-probate, it wasn't just a legal trick, it was a statement that I no longer mattered in the future they were building, that the bricks I laid could be paved over without acknowledgement. And maybe that's what hurt most, not the money, not the legal slight, but the erasure, the casual removal of who I'd been. I thought of Warren often during those months, what he would have said, how he'd laugh, low and kind, and tell me, "Chor, don't fight fire with fire, Chor, fight it with foundation." And so I did. I didn't scream, didn't burn the house down, didn't throw plates or write angry Facebook posts. I gathered documents. I brewed tea. I listened to birds on the porch swing. And I planned, because justice doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wears quiet shoes and shows up to the gala uninvited. And when it speaks, even if just once, it shifts the room. I've learned that you don't need permission to reclaim yourself. You don't need someone else's guilt to validate your pain. What you need is truth, and a backbone that remembers its worth. Noah reminded me of that. Not with speeches, but with presence. Every time he showed up without being asked. Every time he looked at me like I still had something to teach him. He pulled me back to myself. Amelia's path will be hers to walk. I've let go of needing an apology that erases all damage. That's not how healing works. Sometimes healing is sitting in the same room again. Not because everything's fixed, but because someone finally stayed long enough to listen. I don't know what people expected when they saw me step on that stage. An old woman? A bitter matriarch? Maybe. But I knew who I was that night. I wasn't someone looking for revenge. I was someone claiming my place in the story I helped build. And now, with the Warren and Margot Fund blooming quietly in little classrooms across Arizona, I don't worry about being forgotten. Legacy isn't carved in marble. It's tucked into bedtime stories, folded into backpacks, whispered by teachers who use your old lesson plans without even knowing your name. It lives. It lingers. And that is enough. So if you're sitting there, wondering whether it's too late to speak, let me tell you, no one can silence a voice that remembers its own echo. You may be tired. You may feel small, but your name still matters. Say it, stand in it, then pass it down not with force, but with faith. Because legacy, real legacy, doesn't shout, it holds, it teaches, and